Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Cornwell, and today I wanted to go over the steps I took to build my custom guitar pedal board here. From the initial idea to the finished product, there's obviously a ton of ways to go about doing this, and I just wanted to share with you the process I took, hopefully giving you some creative ideas and things to consider. Alright, let's get started. So you first want to get an idea of the dimensions of your pedal board. There's really no right or wrong answer here, it's entirely up to you and what you're looking for. I wanted something about 12 inches deep and 27 inches wide. Also keep in mind whether or not you'll need extra space for future additions to your board as well. Here's a quick rundown of the tools and supplies you'll need. The Dremel tool with router adapter was absolutely essential. You'll also need various foam brushes, wood filler, a sanding block, tape measure, and wood glue. Having a few wood files helped as well, both the flat and round styles. And as far as the wood material goes, I went with two 8x4 sheets of 1/2-inch oak plywood. You'll also need a saw of some kind to cut things to specification. My jigsaw worked great for this. A pair of table clamps will also be important to have. Before officially assembling everything, you'll want to double check all your dimensions. This includes the width and depth on each side. You'll also want to measure from opposite corner to corner. If the bottom piece was cut incorrectly, you could end up with a trapezoid-shaped pedal board instead of a rectangle, and you don't want that. For the initial assembly, I used heavy-duty wood glue along all the joints, with table clamps to keep everything in place. Once everything dries up, get ready for some serious sanding, starting coarse and working your way up to the finer grits. I also went back with wood filler to seal up any additional spaces. I used the jigsaw and wood files to make side handles and a center support piece. I also notched out the centerpiece, making it easier to route wiring later on. I'm not an expert on dovetail corners, but they were pretty easy to cut with the jigsaw. I also went back and added a few reinforcement wood screws where necessary. Next, I cut the top piece where the pedals would sit. Initially I thought one large hole would be adequate for cable routing, but I ended up recutting this piece and doing something a little different later on. One of my goals for this project was to have the top of the board hinge up so I could hide additional hardware and accessories inside. Things like the power supply, wiring, or even additional pedals if I wanted. For this next part of the video, I want to go over what I did for the hinges, for the stain, as well as how I set up all the required hardware here. Let's take a look. So for the hinges, I initially tried a few different types, and I ended up going with a frameless cabinet style. Keep in mind that every hinge fits a little bit differently. To get the clearance right, I had to add these two small pieces of wood on the inside back section. Afterwards, I lined up the top piece and marked where the hinges would be installed. The router was essential for this step. Before making things official with mounting the hinges on the top piece, I practiced a few times on a scrap piece of wood before working on the actual piece I intended to use. This can also be a good time to sand and smooth the top as well. Another neat thing I wanted to do here was have the top recessed about 1/4 inch, so when everything was said and done, I could use a thin piece of black foam to give the pedal board a nice clean finish look. To confirm things were in line and symmetric, I cut a small piece of foam to ensure a flush fit at all 4 corners. It's now time to stain the pedal board to a color of your choosing. I removed all the hardware, hinges, and screws, and placed temporary small nails on the bottom at each corner. I did this so I could stain the bottom first before flipping it right side up and finishing everywhere else. I ended up doing multiple coats of stain before sealing everything. After everything dried, I removed the nails and mounted rubber feet to the bottom at each corner. Alright, moving on to all the cool hardware you get to install, it's now time to outfit the interior of the pedal board. I ordered 3 solderless 1/4-inch jacks. These are pretty much plug and play. I used one for the input, and I wanted 2 for the outputs in case I decided to run the pedals in stereo. I also got an isobrick power supply and an IEC power jack with matching power cord. And I ended up using a small 4-outlet power strip. The big challenge here is configuring the top input-output jack panel. Here again, the router came to the rescue. For the power jack, it was a 2-part process. I had one main hole where the wiring would enter, and then a second recessed border to make it all sit flush. To make the holes for the 1/4-inch input jacks, some people recommend using spade drill bits. I initially tried this approach and was unhappy with how things came out. It may just have been user error. I ended up going back in very carefully with the router and polishing things up. I also wanted to touch things up with some wood filler. I went back in with the wood files and sandpaper to clean things up afterwards. It then came time to mount the jack panel. I used the router to recess the top just a bit so my jack panel would sit flush with the 1/4-inch foam I planned to use. Once everything was ready, these pieces were wood glued in place. Before I stained the top, I wanted to get an idea on where all the wires and cables would come up from the bottom. I laid out my pedals exactly as I anticipated them set up. Then I drilled holes where appropriate. And even though most of the wiring on this project is hidden, I went ahead and got mesh sleeving with heat shrink tubing to dress things up inside. This was purely for aesthetics. Once the top piece is ready, it can also be stained and sealed. The hinges and hardware can be added as well. And to wrap things up here, I chopped off the original plug on the power strip, and I used a soldering iron to hardwire the IEC jack in place. Here's the wiring diagram that you'll need to match things up. And just in case you can't read my chicken scratch, here's a neater version. Lastly, I cut out the 1/4-inch top foam piece to match exactly where my pedals would go. And there's the finished product. So there you have it. I hope this gave you some creative ideas on how to set up your next board. I would definitely recommend this project if you're looking for a fun and rewarding way to spend your time. I would not recommend doing this if you're simply looking to save money. You're far better off just going with a prefabricated option. There's a ton of them out there. Anyhow, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.